Hey everyone, it's John Literal here, and this is part 4 of the series that I'm doing, The History of the Illuminati. And I'm reading from the book by Des Griffin called Fourth Reich of the Rich. And it's found on page 73, chapter 6, and it's titled Illuminati Part 2. And this is the history of the Illuminati from 1876 to 1981. And so when Des Griffin was writing this book, he was given a history up to the point that he published this edition of his book called Fourth Reich of the Rich. And before I get started, I do want to apologize. I've got background noise. I've got the air conditioner on. This is my man cave. That's where I do all my videos for the most part. And it's just too hot outside, so I've got to have the air conditioner on. Otherwise, the computer would probably burn up from the heat because I'm in an upstairs of a house. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Des Griffin writes, political and religious philosophers have long since recognized the fact that the most effective way to conquer a man is to conquer his mind. Education, then, is where the action is in the battle to conquer the world. The leaders of the Illuminati realized from the beginning that if they were to succeed in their plan to conquer and rule the world, they had to gain control of the schools, colleges, and universities. They also recognized the need to infiltrate and strongly influence newspapers, magazines, and publishing houses. The United States, Britain, and other nations with a tradition of liberty and freedom were zeroed in on for the special quote-unquote treatment in this regard. As Lady Queenborough wrote some 40 years ago, quote, "A mind that is positive cannot be controlled. For the purpose of occult dominion, minds must therefore be rendered passive and negative in order that control may be achieved. Minds consciously working to a definite end are a power, and a power can be opposed, power for good or power for evil. The scheme for world dominion might be doomed by the recognition of this principle alone. But, as it is unfortunately recognized, it remains unchallenged." She went on to say, destruction, materialism, imposition. These are the 3 points of Albert Pike, and they seem to be ruling the world today. End of quote. Some years ago, the author heard the president of a small independent college state that at the turn of the century, quote, "the educational system jumped the tracks of insanity and went careening off into the wilderness, and that since then the educators have been funneling poison into the plastic, unsuspecting minds," end of quote, of those entrusted to their care. Those statements are absolutely right, except for one vitally important point. Education did not jump the tracks. It was deliberately derailed. Let's understand the facts. Professor Carroll Quigley, in his book Tragedy and Hope, openly boasts that he has been for many years an elitist insider and has a first-hand knowledge of how the conspiracy has developed around the world. Regarding education in England, he states, quote, "Until 1870, there was no professorship of fine arts at Oxford. But in that year, thanks to the Slade bequest, John Ruskin was named to such a chair. He hit Oxford like an earthquake, not so much because he talked about fine arts, but because he also talked about the empire and England's downtrodden masses, and above all, because he talked about 3 of these things as moral issues." End of quote. John Ruskin, who lived between 1819 to 1890, was born in London and the son of a prosperous wine merchant, from whom he inherited a large fortune. His biographer, Kenneth Clark, tells us that Ruskin, quote, "saw that the state must take control of the means of production and distribution and organize them for the good of the community as a whole. But he was prepared to place the control of the state in the hands of a single man. My continual aim," he said, "has been to show the eternal superiority of some men to others. sometimes even of one man to all others. He had a very low opinion of democracy. In spite of its materialistic philosophy, he would, I think, have approved of communism. The peasant communes in China, in particular, are exactly on his model. He would not have thought the cure worse than the disease because he could not imagine a worse disease than a capitalist society of the 19th century. End of quote from the book called Ruskin Today. In short, Ruskin's doctrine of Illuminism, pure and simple, or it was Illuminism. This fact was largely hidden behind a carefully erected facade. Ruskin spoke to the Oxford undergraduates as members of the privileged ruling class. He told them that they were the possessors of a magnificent tradition of education, beauty, rule of law, freedom, decency, and self-discipline, but that this tradition could not be saved and did not deserve to be saved unless it could be extended to the lower classes in England itself and to the non-English masses throughout the world. If this precious tradition were not extended to these two great majorities, the minority of the upper-class Englishmen would ultimately be submerged by these majorities and the tradition lost. To prevent this, the tradition must be extended to the masses and to the empire. End of quote by Quigley. Ruskin and his secret backers had thrown out some juicy bait, and it was hungrily seized upon by his students, all of whom came out of the top drawer of British society. Ruskin's message had a sensational impact. His inaugural lecture was copied out in longhand by one undergraduate, Cecil Rhodes, who kept it with him for 30 years. Rhodes, who lived between 1853 and 1902, feverishly exploited the diamond and gold fields of South Africa, rose to be Prime Minister of Cape Colony, contributed money to the political parties, controlled parliamentary seats both in England and South Africa. Rhodes inspired devoted support for his goals from others in South Africa and in England. With financial support from Lord Rothschild and Alfred Beat, he was able to monopolize the diamond mines of South Africa as De Beers Consolidated Mines and to build up a great gold mining enterprise as Consolidated Goldfields. In the middle of the 1890s, Rhodes had a personal income of at least £1 million sterling a year, then about $5 million, which was spent so freely for his mysterious purposes that he was usually overdrawn on his account. These purposes centered on his desire to federate the English-speaking peoples and to bring all the habitable portions of the world under their control. For this purpose, Rhodes left part of his great fortune to found the Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford in order to spread the English ruling class tradition throughout the English-speaking world as Ruskin had wanted. Dr. Quigley goes on to tell how many of the members of the British ruling class become devoted disciples of Ruskin and devoted the rest of their lives to carrying out his ideas. On February 5th, 1891, Rhodes's group joined with one from Cambridge University, led by William Stead, an ardent social reformer, to form a secret society of which Rhodes had been dreaming for 16 years. This secret society, just like Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati, had outer circles, known as the Association of Helpers. In 1909 through 1913, Lord Alfred Milner organized semi-secret groups known as the Roundtable groups in the chief British dependencies and in the United States. These still function in 8 countries. They kept in touch with each other by personal correspondence and frequent visits, and through an influential quarterly magazine called the Roundtable, founded in 1910 and largely supported by Sir A. Bailey's money. In 1919, they founded the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Chatham House, for which the chief financial supporters were Sir A. Bailey and the Astor family, owners of the paper called The Times. After 1925, a somewhat similar structure of organizations known as the Institute of Pacific Relations was set up in 12 countries holding territory in the Pacific area, and units in each British Dominion existing in an interlocking basis with the Roundtable Group and the Royal Institute of International Affairs. The power and influence of this Rhodes-Milner Group in British imperial affairs and in foreign policy since 1889, although not widely recognized, can hardly be exaggerated. Similar institutes of international affairs were established in the chief British dominions and in the United States, where it is known as the Council on Foreign Relations, in the period of 1919 through 1927. And that's in the book Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley. Let's take a look at Rockefeller's General Education Board. At the turn of the century, one of the most despised names on the American scene was that of Rockefeller. Old John D. Rockefeller had earned his reputation with unprecedented guile, deceit, and greed. His name was synonymous with ruthless exploitation. He often stated that competition is a sin. Let me interject here. Rockefeller is one of the Illuminati bloodline families. You know, they were definitely, the Rockefellers is the Illuminati in America, and also the mention of the Council on Foreign Relations. Council on Foreign Relations is the Illuminati in America as well. We'll get back to the text. It says, in an effort to change his image, but not his character, John D. Rockefeller hired Ivy Lee, one of the nation's leading ad men. At Lee's suggestion, Mr. Standard Oil Lee, J.D. Rockefeller, carried a pocket full of dimes around with him and handed them to young children when he made his rare public appearances. As part of his image improvement program, Rockefeller set up a series of foundations and trusts. Outwardly, these were presented to the public as an effort on Rockefeller's part to better the lot of American people by financing projects in education, medicine, and religion. But true to John D. Rockefeller's deeply conspiratorial nature, there was always a catch. As Gary Allen points out in his new bestseller, it was new at the time that Des Griffin wrote this, The Rockefeller File by Gary Allen. He says, quote, he had an even more Machiavellian scheme in mind. He would give money away to foundations under his control and then have those foundations spend the money in ways which brought even more power and profits to the Rockefeller empire. The money, quote unquote, given away would be bread cast upon the waters, but bread that almost always had a hook in it. John D. Rockefeller was to refer to this as the principle of scientific giving. Wow. What a way of wording that. The fact was clearly demonstrated when it came to Rockefeller's relationship with education. John D. Rockefeller enrolled to the aid of Fred Gates, who earlier had enjoyed immense success as a frontman for the Pillsbury Flour Company, to organize his General Education Board. The real purpose of this board was not, as some were led to believe at the time, to upgrade the standard of American education and so benefit the nation as a whole. Just like Clinton Roosevelt and Albert Pike before them, they showed their hand in their first publication. They followed a pattern laid out over 100 years earlier by Adam Weishaupt, who wrote that, quote, it is necessary to gain the common people to our order. The best means to that end is influence in the schools, end of quote by Weishaupt. It would be difficult to express more precisely the objectives of Weishaupt's conspiracy in the field of educational propaganda than was done by occasional letter number 1 of Rockefeller's General Education Board issued in 1904. It states that, quote, in our dreams we have limitless resources and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present education conventions fade from their minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own good will upon a grateful and responsible rural folk. We shall not try to make these people of any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We have not to raise up from among them authors, editors, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have ample supply. The task we set before ourselves is very simple as well as very beautiful as a beautiful one. To train these people as we have found as we find them to a perfectly ideal life just where they are. So we will organize our children and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way, in the homes, in the shops, and on the farm. End of quote. All the important elements of Weishaupt's Illuminism are found in this letter. First, we see the pose of philanthropy. Second, the intent to brainwash or mold the people. Third, the elimination of tradition, science, and real learning. Fourth, the dictatorship objective. Fifth, the intent to regiment the peasants in a caste system, just as they are. Sixth, the plan to reduce national intelligence to the lowest common denominator and to destroy parental influence, and so to break up the family. Seventh, total contempt for the peasants. Number 8, the element of subversion and the un-Americanism, the declared intent to overthrow accepted customs and to serve the purposes of the Rockefellers. And lastly, the perfectibilism, that is, the perfecting of human nature, which was also Weishaupt's fake aim. The corruptive influence that the Rockefeller Foundation have had on the American school system is thoroughly documented, with a congressional committee headed by Carol Reese of Tennessee tried to hold an open investigation into the activities of the foundations. They ran into a solid wall of opposition from all the powers that be in the nation's capital, and it had to be disbanded. 4 years later, the committee's general counsel, Renee A. Wormser, wrote a very revealing book on the subject called Foundations, Their Power and Influence. He stated that the facts that this committee developed leads one to the conclusion that there was indeed something in the nature of an actual conspiracy among certain leading educators in the United States to bring about socialism through the use of our school systems. It goes on to say that a very powerful complex of foundations and allied organizations has developed over the years to exercise high degree of control over education. Part of this complex and ultimately responsible for it are the Rockefeller and Carnegie groups of foundations. Rockefeller and his allies understood that in order to control the school system, they had to gain control of the teachers' colleges. This was accomplished over a period of years by making grants to the leading universities for the alleged purpose of helping them develop and grow. But true to Rockefeller's principle of scientific giving, there was a hook in every grant. Rockefeller's fronts always ended up on the boards of the institutions being helped, quote-unquote helped. This gave them a big say in how things were run. Progressive educator John Dewey was a leading figure in their overall plans. As head of the Teachers College at Columbia University, he became prominent and was later the most influential man in American education. In 1919, with Rockefeller money, he founded the Progressive Education Association to promulgate the ideas of his masters. As time went by, Dewey was joined by Rhodes, Counts, Kilpatrick, and other one-world socialists. They succeeded in worming their way into positions of authority and set out to use the educational system as a tool to accomplish their political goals. In their writings and speeches, they made no effort to hide the fact that their main objective was to lead the American nation, like a flock of dumb, unsuspecting sheep, in a Pied Piper procession into a socialist one-world utopia where they would, like in every other fairy tale, live happily ever after. A few quotations serve to prove this point. In 1933, Dr. Harold Ruggs, in his book called The Great Technology, revealed how they planned to bring America back into the bondage of a socialist state. It says, quote, "A new public mind is to be created. How? Only by creating tens of millions of new individual minds in welding them into a new social mind. Old stereotypes must be broken up and new climates of opinion formed in the neighborhoods of America. It goes on to say that through the schools of the world, we shall decimate a new conception of government, one that will embrace all the collective activities of men, one that will postulate the need of scientific control and operation of economic activities in the interest of all people. End of quote. Dr. George Counts, a professor of education and a leading member of Dewey's Frontier Thinkers, wrote that, quote, the teachers should reach for power and then make the most of their conquest, to the extent that they are allowed to fashion the curriculum and procedures of the school. They will definitely and positively influence the social attitudes, ideas, behavior of the coming generation. End of quote. My God, have we not seen that come to fruition? In the 1934 Report of Education, produced by the American Historical Association and sponsored by the Carnegie Foundation, Counts wrote that, quote, the age of individualism and freedom in economy and government is closing and a new age of collectivism is emerging. End of quote. In an article in the New Republic, July 29th, 1936, the leading British socialist Harold Laski stated, quote, stripped of its careful neutral phrases, the report is an educational program for a socialist America. End of quote by Counts. Counts and his associates never denied this fact. They stated that to achieve their objective, basic changes in our ideas were needed. How are these changes in the ideas of a nation brought about? Simply by changing what is taught in the schools, colleges, and universities, in the churches, and in the mass media. I'll go ahead and end the video here, and I'll pick back up on it in part 5. And it just keeps getting better and better. And what I'll do is I'll leave a link in the description box below to a free PDF of this book by Des Griffin, A Fourth Reich of the Rich. Folks, take care and have a good day.